The motel light flickers once, then again, 2 in the morning. A flashlight beam cutting across a torn-open duffel bag. A man on his knees, hands frozen over an envelope sealed in red wax that's been waiting 3 years to be found. The postmark says Naval Station Coronado. He turns it over once, doesn't breathe. 12 hours earlier, a woman stood in a doorway and told him to be gone by noon. 2 trash bags sat at his feet, proof of everything he'd just been told he wasn't worth keeping. An iron gate swung shut behind him. A number that doesn't make sense the first time he reads it. Or the second 9 figures. His name typed at the top, in connection to a man he never met. Outside, the rain has stopped. He hasn't opened it yet. The rain didn't care. That was the thing about Atlanta rain in November. It didn't come down soft. It didn't give you time to find cover. It hit you all at once, full and cold, like it had been waiting up there all day just to make a point. Victor Briggs stood on the marble front steps of the Ashford estate and did not move. 2 black trash bags sat at his feet, stretched at the seams. Heavy the way things were heavy when they held everything you had left in the world, and it still wasn't much. 1 bag held Jesse and Theo's clothes, small t-shirts rolled into uneven cylinders, 2 pairs of sneakers with Velcro straps because neither boy had learned to tie laces yet, and Gerald. The stuffed rabbit Theo screamed for every single night without exception. Victor had learned that lesson the hard way, 3 weeks after Renee died. He was not going to learn it again. The other bag held what remained of his own life. It fit into less space than it should have. Jess stood on his left, Theo on his right. Both of them pressed into his thighs like they were trying to disappear into him. Like if they pushed hard enough, they could get all the way through and come out somewhere safer on the other side. Jess held his plastic fire truck. The red paint had been peeling off the hood for 2 months. He dropped it down the stairs inside this house twice, and not once had anyone bothered to comfort him about it. He turned the small ladder wheel with his thumb now, slowly, the way he did when he was thinking about something he didn't have words for yet. Theo was sucking his thumb. He'd stopped 8 months ago. Cold turkey one morning, like he'd simply decided he was done. Started again the week after his mother's funeral. Victor didn't say anything about the thumb. Behind all 3 of them, Brutus sat at perfect attention. 80 pounds of retired Navy K9, black and tan, ears forward and locked, amber eyes fixed on the front door. A low vibration moved through the dog's chest, not quite a growl. Something older than a growl. Something that lived below the level of sound and meant the same thing in any language. Victor had 1 hand on Jesse's shoulder, 1 on Theo's. He looked straight ahead. Sandra Ashford stood in the doorway with her arms folded across a beige cashmere sweater. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked like it required its own act of will to hold in place. She smelled, even from 6 feet away in open air, of gin and expensive soap and something cold that had been cold for a very long time. She was not crying. She had cried at Renee's funeral. Loud, visible crying. Front pew, black dress with pearl buttons. She'd gripped Victor's arm at the graveside like they were close. Like she hadn't spent 6 years calling him Renee's mistake under her breath at family dinners. She never quite invited him to. She wasn't gripping anything now, Victor. Her voice had no temperature. I need you cleared out before noon. I have the cleaning crew coming at 1. That was the whole sentence. No explanation. No acknowledgement that the 2 small boys pressing against their father's legs were her daughter's children. No acknowledgement that she was watching them leave in garbage bags. Just noon. Just cleaners at 1. Victor looked at her for a moment. 1 long, flat moment. Then he picked up both trash bags, shifted the weight across his shoulders. The plastic stretched against the back of his neck, and he felt every titanium screw in his spine register the load. 3 surgeries in 11 years of service. His body kept the record even when he didn't. Come on, boys. He didn't look back. Not at the staircase where Renee used to sit on Sunday mornings with her coffee and her book, legs tucked under her, reading in the slanted light that came through the upper windows, just right between 8 and 9 a.m. Not at the back garden where she'd chased the twins with a garden hose last July. All 3 of them shrieking, Renee laughing so hard she doubled over and couldn't catch her breath. Not at Raymond Ashford, who had appeared somewhere in the background of the foyer the way Raymond always appeared. Nearby, visible. Holding something amber in a crystal glass, not meeting anyone's eyes, not saying a word. That was Raymond's entire move. Stand within range, say nothing. Let Sandra handle the business and keep his hands looking clean. Victor walked down the marble steps. Gravel crunched under his boots, each step deliberate and even. The sound of a man who was not running. The rain hit him immediately. Full and cold and without apology, he buckled Jesse in first. Then crossed to Theo's side and worked the chest clip. His fingers were wet. The plastic was wet. His hands were not cooperating the way trained hands were supposed to cooperate. He stood in the rain fumbling with a 5-year-old's car seat buckle for 4 full seconds, while water ran into his eyes and down the inside of his collar. 4 seconds, which felt like 40. The kind of humiliation that doesn't have a name because naming it would require looking at it directly. And he was not going to do that right now. He got it. Clicked it shut, pressed his palm flat against Theo's chest for just a breath longer than necessary. Theo looked up at him with eyes that were too old for a 5-year-old, didn't say anything at all. Victor closed the door. Brutus had already jumped into the passenger seat. He was shaking rain from his coat in full-body shudders, and the cab immediately took on the smell of wet dog and old coffee and the crumbled remains of a granola bar that had been living under the front seat since sometime in March. Victor climbed in, put the key in. The engine coughed, rattled, then caught with a low, ragged roar. Through the rain-blurred windshield, he could see Sandra still framed in the doorway, watching them leave. Not to make sure they were all right. The way you watched something go that you'd already decided didn't matter. He pulled forward. The iron gates opened automatically, then swung shut behind the truck with a heavy, final clang that he felt in his back teeth. He drove. The gas tank sat just above the quarter mark. He had $38 in his checking account. He had 2 5-year-olds in the back seat, a dog that needed hip medication twice a day, and no destination. Daddy, Theo's voice from behind him, small and careful, testing the air. Are we going to a new house? Victor's hands tightened on the wheel. Yeah, buddy. He cleared his throat once. We're going on an adventure. The words tasted like ash on the way out. He had planned extraction routes in the dark with bad intel and 3 minutes to work with. He had kept men breathing in conditions that did not allow for panic. He had always been the one who knew what came next. He was lying to a 5-year-old about a motel. Jess didn't say anything. He was watching the Ashford neighborhood disappear through the window. The large houses set back from the road, the manicured lawns, the sprinkler systems still running in the rain because no one had thought to turn them off. He watched all of it slide away. Then he looked down at his fire truck and turned the small ladder wheel with his thumb. Very slowly, like he was thinking about something he didn't have words for yet. Victor watched him in the rearview mirror and kept driving. The Sunrise Motel sat between a check-cashing place and a nail salon with a broken letter in its sign. All of it inside a strip mall that had been giving up on itself for about 15 years. The name was optimistic to the point of cruelty. There was no sunrise here. There was a neon sign with a dead letter that bled orange light through thin curtains in irregular pulses. Not steady, not rhythmic, just intermittent, like something trying to keep a beat it had mostly forgotten. Room 109. It smelled like cigarette smoke and mildew and the accumulated effort of 100 cleaning products that had never quite won the argument. The carpet was a color that might have been beige, before it became whatever it was now. The overhead light buzzed at a frequency that lived just at the edge of awareness. One of the beds had a spring that pressed up through the mattress, at a specific angle that Victor would introduce himself to with his lower back around 2 in the morning, but it was $38 a night, which was exactly what he had. He crossed to the gas station across the street and bought 2 hot dogs, a bottle of water, and a bag of small orange crackers shaped like goldfish, because Theo would eat goldfish crackers under any conditions at any hour. That was one stable truth Victor could build on tonight. He microwaved the hot dogs in the room. The microwave made a sound of personal struggle. The boys ate on the bed. Theo worked through his crackers one at a time with great individual concentration, as though each one required a separate decision. Jesse finished his hot dog in 4 bites, set the rat aside, and sat with his fire truck in his lap, looking at the middle distance. Victor watched them. He had this habit from the beginning. Since the first week after they were born, when Renee was exhausted past language and he'd taken the night shift and just sat in the dark watching them breathe. The habit of counting, making sure of both of them, Jess, Theo, Jesse. Theo's still here. He ran the bath. The water pressure was bad and it took longer than it should. He washed both boys, dried them with the thin motel towels, got them into their pajamas. Theo wanted Gerald, and Victor dug Gerald out of the trash bag, slightly damp, carrying the smell of rain, and handed him over without comment. Theo tucked the rabbit under his arm with the certainty of a child who knew exactly what he needed. Then, Victor sat on the edge of the bed and told them a story. No books. He hadn't grabbed any books when he left, so he told them the one Renee used to tell. The one she'd made up herself about a boy who could speak to rivers. She'd changed it every time. Added things. Moved pieces around. He couldn't remember all of it. He remembered the shape of it. The feeling of it. The way her voice had changed when she got to the good parts. He did what he could with what he had. Jess fell asleep first, then Theo. With Gerald pressed against his cheek and his thumb finding its way back to his mouth in the dark, Victor stayed on the edge of the mattress for a long time after that. The room held only the buzz of the light and the orange pulse outside, and the sound of two small boys breathing, and his own breath underneath it all. He counted the money again. $38. Minus $38 for the room. Paid already on the emergency card. The one with the $200 limit he'd been preserving for actual emergencies. This was an actual emergency. He had roughly $160 left on that card. Enough for maybe 4 more nights. Maybe 5 if he was careful with food. The math wasn't the problem. He could always do the math. The problem was what the math led to, which was a door he wasn't ready to walk through tonight. He leaned forward and put his face in his hands. The dark behind his palms was quiet and complete. He stayed inside it for a while. Not crying, not thinking anything fully formed, just existing in the small space between one moment and the next. A cold nose pressed hard against his forearm. He lifted his face. Brutus was standing between his knees, ears forward, brow furrowed in the intense way the dog had when something needed attending to. Not alarmed, not detecting a threat. Just present. Just doing the thing he had always done when Victor's heart rate climbed above a level the dog had apparently memorized. "I'm okay," Victor said. His voice came out scraped and low. Brutus did not agree. He pushed his head under Victor's arm with enough force to be clear about it, and stayed there. The full weight of his skull resting against Victor's ribs. Victor put his hand on the back of the dog's neck. "Okay," he said again. Quita. He didn't know if he was saying it to the dog or to the room or to the space that had been filled by someone who always knew, without being told, without needing context, exactly what to say when he got like this. 6 words hand flat on his chest. "You're home. You're here. I've got you." He would give everything he had left the truck, the dog, the emergency card, every screw holding his spine together to hear those 6 words one more time. But Renee was gone. 6 months and she was gone. And grief was not what the movies said it was. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was $38 in a motel room. It was not having a book to read to your kids. It was telling a 5-year-old they were going on an adventure and tasting the lie all the way down. He sat up straight, rolled his neck. There was a green canvas duffel bag in the corner, olive drab, military issue, still packed from his last rotation home. He'd grabbed it without thinking on the way out of the Ashford house. It had been in the back of the hall closet where he'd shoved it 6 months ago, and he hadn't had the bandwidth to unpack it since. He'd been surviving. Unpacking a duffel bag was not surviving. He got up, unzipped the main compartment, discharge papers, photographs, his father's old watch, Renee's first ultrasound, the one where the technician had said, "There are 2 of them," and Renee had grabbed his hand so hard he'd lost feeling in 2 fingers, a folded flag in a triangle case. His tactical knife, a bundle of paracord. He didn't need any of it tonight. He zipped it closed and started to stand. Brutus made a sound, not a bark, not a growl, a specific tight whine low in his throat, the sound the dog used when something required attention. Not urgency, precision. Victor had heard that sound exactly 3 times before. Each time it had meant something real. "What?" Victor said. Brutus was facing the bag. He moved toward it, pressed his nose along the bottom seam, then the side, methodical, deliberate. He pushed his snout into the narrow gap beside the main zipper and inhaled in long, controlled pulls. Then he moved to the flat side compartment, the one with the broken zipper pull. Victor had been planning to fix for 2 years, and took the zipper tab between his teeth and pulled. The teeth parted with a dry rasp. Victor was across the room in 2 steps. "Okay, I've got it." He crouched, pushed the dog aside with one firm hand, reached into the compartment. His fingers moved past the emergency flashlight, a spare lighter, the bundle of paracord from the main bag that had somehow migrated. And then his hand hit something else. Thick, stiff, the texture of heavy paper that had been sitting undisturbed for a long time. He pulled it out. A manila envelope, bulging, sealed with red wax that had cracked at the edges and been stained at some point with old coffee and something that might have been motor oil. A return address in the upper left corner. A law firm, Chicago, embossed type, professional. The kind of firm that charged for the quality of its letterhead. The recipient line was typed, Petty Officer Victor A. Briggs, Naval Station Coronado. He turned it over. Turned it back. The postmark was 3 years old. 3 years. He looked at the wax seal. A letter pressed into it, a B, stylized, old-fashioned. The kind of mark used by men who believed their names deserved monuments. He had seen that letter before. Once, on the side of a truck he'd passed on the highway when he was maybe 12 years old. Once, on a business card his father had kept in the back of his dresser drawer and never talked about. Never talked about a lot of things. That was where Victor had learned the habit. Why hadn't he opened it? He knew why the envelope had arrived on a Tuesday. He remembered it because he'd gone to the mail slot at the base housing unit before his shift, and he'd seen the return address from Chicago. And he'd known immediately that this was not a routine piece of mail. He'd tucked it into the side pocket of his duffel to open that evening after work. That afternoon, Renee called him during his lunch break. She'd found a lump. She'd been to the doctor that morning without telling him, because she hadn't wanted to worry him over what was probably nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. The doctor had used words like concerning, and we need to move quickly, and I want to get you in front of a specialist by the end of the week. The envelope stayed in the pocket. Then came the appointments. The biopsies. The diagnosis that arrived on a Thursday morning in a too-bright office, while Victor sat beside Renee, holding her hand hard enough to leave marks. Then the treatment. The moving out of base housing when he left active duty to be her caregiver. Packing their apartment in 40 minutes with a sick wife and 2 3-year-olds because they'd lost the housing allowance and couldn't make the rent. Moving into base-adjacent housing. Then moving again when that fell through. The duffel had gone into every closet in every place they'd lived. And he had never once thought about the envelope inside it. He'd been keeping his wife alive. The envelope was not keeping his wife alive. Now he held it in a motel room at 2 in the morning, in the orange pulse of a broken neon sign, and looked at his own name typed on paper that had been waiting in the dark for 3 years. He sat there until the sitting felt like the wrong thing to keep doing. Then he slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open. The papers were dense, small font. Legal language that required 4 full reads before it untangled itself into meaning. He sat with them until he understood Thomas Briggs Sr., his grandfather. A man Victor had never met, never spoken to, had only ever seen in a single photograph found by accident at 19 in a box under his father's bed. A tall man in a dark suit, serious face. The look of someone who had decided early that life was a negotiation and he intended to win it. Victor's father had come into the room, seen him holding the photograph, and taken it back without a word. That was the entire conversation. That was all they ever said about Thomas Briggs Sr. What the document said was this: Thomas had built a freight company, Briggs National, 1 truck, 1 regional route out of Atlanta, 40 years of expansion until it was operating in 17 states and employing hundreds of people. He'd sold it to a private equity group in the last 2 years of his life. Strategic. He'd known he was dying. He wanted the asset liquid before the estate was settled. He had cut off Victor's father because Victor's father had married a woman Thomas considered beneath the family. Not a villain's reason, a small man's reason. The kind of reason that ruins decades and never gets examined. Because the person who made the decision is too proud, too stubborn, too convinced of their own correctness to look at what it cost. They never spoke again. Now Thomas had died 3 years ago. He had 1 surviving heir. The trust documents were clear. An account established in Victor's name, funded at the time of Thomas's death, sitting untouched for 3 years, drawing interest, waiting for a man who had never known to look for it. And at the bottom of the attached bank statement, a number, 9 figures, $247 million. Victor set the paper down, picked it up again, same number. He set it on the floor beside him very carefully. The way you set down something fragile, or something you weren't certain was real. He looked at his boys. Theo had turned in his sleep. His arm had tightened around Gerald. Jesse had not moved. He slept the way he did everything, with economy, without waste. Then Victor's brain did what he had been keeping it from doing for 6 months. The calculation, not the $38 problem, the other one. The one he'd been holding in a locked room in the back of his mind since the morning the oncologist sat across from them in that too bright office and explained the options. There had been a clinical trial, an immunotherapy protocol. New, showing results in early-stage cases that were the doctor had chosen his words carefully encouraging. Not covered by insurance, not covered by the VA. The out-of-pocket cost was a number the doctor had said with a particular, practiced neutrality. The way people said things they knew would break something. Victor had asked what the options were if they couldn't access the trial. He remembered the answer. He had sold Renee's grandfather's pocket watch, the one her family had entrusted to him at 16, and he'd kept safe for 18 years on a Tuesday afternoon for $340. He'd driven straight to the pharmacy. He had given blood plasma twice a week until they told him he needed to wait between visits. He had called the VA and sat on hold, and been transferred and sat on hold again, and been told to submit forms and wait. He had submitted the forms. He had waited. The envelope had been in the bag. The bag had been in the closet. The closet had been in a house they'd had to vacate 3 months into Renee's treatment. He had packed that house in 40 minutes. He had a dying wife and 2 3-year-olds and 40 minutes, and he had not checked every pocket of every bag. He had not checked. He pressed the heel of his hand against the center of his chest. Hard. Like he could hold something in place manually. Something had come loose. Something structural. Something that had been locked down for 6 months under the weight of just getting through each day. And now, in this orange-lit room at this hour, it was breaking through. A sound came out of him. He had not planned it. He would not have chosen it. It was not the kind of sound a man made when there were people listening. It came from somewhere below, language low and rough and wrong, the sound of something that had been held too long finally giving way. Theo did not wake up. Jess did not wake up. Brutus was there immediately. Shoved his whole head into Victor's arms, licked the salt from his wrists, whined high and thin the sound the dog made when he didn't know what else to do but couldn't leave. Victor buried his face in the dog's fur. "I'm sorry," he said to Renee. He knew she wasn't there. He was not a man who believed in things he could not verify, but he said it because it needed to exist as a sound in a real room. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." He stayed there until the sound stopped, not because it was finished. Because the body runs out. He wiped his face, sat up straight, pulled the papers back into his lap and read them again. All of it, every page, every footnote, every date. He read the way he read mission briefs, looking for the inconsistency, the exit, the thing that would reveal it as something other than what it appeared to be. There was no inconsistency. The account number was real. The law firm was real. The executor, listed on the last page, a man named Kevin Moore. Direct contact number in Chicago, had presumably been waiting for this call for 3 years. Victor looked at the number, memorized it. Did not reach for his phone. Not yet. He set the papers on the floor, leaned his head back against the mattress frame, looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain in the upper right corner, shaped vaguely like the state of Ohio. He counted the texture bumps in the plaster for a while, stopped, looked at his boys. Jess had one hand curled near his face. The fire truck was still in his grip, even in sleep. That was Jesse committed, even unconscious. Theo's thumb had found his mouth again. 2 5-year-olds who had lost their mother 6 months ago, who had been put out into the rain that morning in garbage bags, who had eaten gas station hot dogs for dinner and thought it was fine, because their father had smiled and said adventure, and they had believed him. Because he was their father, and fathers weren't supposed to lie about the fundamental shape of things. He looked at them for a long time, then at the papers, then back at them. Something settled. Not healed. That was a longer process and he knew it. Just settled. The way ground does after something violent moves through it. Quicker. Denser. Different. He gathered the documents, squared the edges, slid them back into the manila envelope and placed it on the nightstand where he could see it. Lay down on the bed beside his boys without removing his boots. Brutus jumped up, settled across the foot of the mattress like a warm, breathing anchor. Victor put one hand on Jesse's back. Felt him breathe. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. The neon pulsed outside. Outside, the rain began to ease. He did not sleep, but he lay still, and the stillness was different from all the stillness that had come before it. Not the stillness of a man losing ground, the stillness of a man deciding what to do next. Theo stirred before the parking lot lights came on. He blinked awake into the gray pre-dawn of room 109. Found his father lying beside him, still dressed, boots still on. Looking at the ceiling with the particular alertness that meant he hadn't slept. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy." Theo looked at him the way 5-year-olds looked at things they decided were important. No filter, no social management, just direct. You were crying before. Victor looked at his son. A little bit, he said. Theo thought about this with the gravity it deserved. He didn't rush past it, didn't try to change the subject. He sat with it the way children sometimes sat with things that adults ran from. Then he moved over and pressed himself against his father's side. Put his small hand on Victor's arm, didn't say anything else. Didn't try to fix it. Just stayed there. That was it. That was the whole thing. Victor put his arm around his son, and they lay there in the thin grey light. The man and the boy and the dog across their feet, while Atlanta assembled itself outside. And the day that would change everything began building quietly toward morning. He had not expected comfort to feel like that. So simple, so small. A 5-year-old's hand on his arm in the dark. But that was the thing about grief nobody told you. The things that helped were never the things you expected. They were never the grand gestures or the right words or the perfect moment. They were a hand on your arm, a dog's weight across your feet. 2 boys breathing the ordinary things, done right? Jess woke up 20 minutes later. He sat up, looked at both of them, assessed the situation with his characteristic quiet efficiency, and said, "Is there any more of those crackers?" Victor almost laughed. "In the bag," he said. Jess retrieved the crackers, brought them back, divided them precisely in half, gave Theo his share, sat cross-legged on the bed and ate his portion one at a time. He didn't ask about last night. He didn't ask about the bags or the house or where they were going. He just ate his crackers and let the morning be what it was. Victor watched him and thought, that is his mother in him. Renee had always been like that. She moved through hard things without making them harder. She looked at what was actually in front of her, not at what she feared might be coming. He had loved her for that more than he had ever told her. That was the other thing about grief. All the things you meant to say. He sat up, put both feet on the floor, took a breath. "Okay," he said. Not to the room, not to the situation. To himself. He had learned something last night. The number on that paper was real, which meant the locked room in the back of his mind, the one he'd been keeping shut for 3 years, the one that said, what if there had been a way that room was going to need to stay locked for a while longer yet? Because if he opened it fully, he would not be able to function. And he needed to function. 2 boys needed him to function. What he could do was act, not react, not rush, not make the mistake that good men made when they felt the ground shift under them moving too fast, making decisions they couldn't walk back, letting relief override judgment. He had learned that lesson in places that didn't allow for second chances. He was not going to waste it here. 3 days. He would give himself 3 days to read the documents until he understood every word. 3 days to think without pressure. 3 days of breakfast and the park and Brutus's hip medication mixed into peanut butter on a plastic spoon. Then he would make the call. "Dad?" Theo again. "Yeah, can we go to the park today?" Victor looked at his son, at the room, at the orange-stained light coming through the thin curtains, at the papers on the nightstand. "Yeah," he said. "We can go to the park." Theo's face did a thing Victor had not seen in a while. A small, uncomplicated smile. The kind that didn't know yet that it had anything to be complicated about. "Can Brutus come?" Victor looked at the dog. Brutus lifted one ear. "Brutus is always coming," Victor said. He spent 3 days managing what was in front of him, breakfast. The park 2 blocks from the motel where Jesse had discovered he could swing high enough to feel the chain go slack at the top, which he pursued with focused intensity. The ice machine down the hall, which Theo visited 6 times a day and treated as a personal relationship. Brutus's hip medication mixed into peanut butter on a plastic spoon, because that dog would not accept any other delivery method without negotiating. He read the trust documents again and again, not because anything changed. Because he needed to understand the full architecture before he walked into a room with someone who had been living inside it for 3 years. He read the way he studied maps before a mission, looking for terrain, for elevation changes, for the places where you could get caught out in the open. On the second evening, he sat at the small desk by the window and thought about Thomas Briggs Sr., a man who had built something from nothing. 1 truck, 1 route, 40 years of showing up and doing the work, and then let the same pride that built it destroy the only thing that should have mattered more, his family. Victor knew what that cost. He knew it in the specific way you knew things you had watched happen from a distance, things that left marks even when they didn't happen to you directly. His father had grown up without a grandfather. Victor had grown up without knowing where half of himself came from. The Thomas had watched from a distance for 15 years. Hired people to track newspaper articles and public records. He'd known about West Point, about the Navy, about Renee, about 2 boys being born. He had known. And he had not called that was a choice. Victor didn't spend time hating him for it. Hating a dead man was a waste of energy he didn't have. But he felt the shape of what had been lost, and it was significant, and he thought it deserved to be felt clearly before he moved forward. Some losses you couldn't fix. You could only carry them correctly. On the 3rd evening, after both boys were asleep, he sat at the small desk and picked up his phone. He looked at the contact number on the last page of the documents. He had memorized it on night 1. He dialed. Kevin Moore answered on the 2nd ring. Mr. Briggs. The voice was low and steady. The voice of a man who had been doing serious work for a long time and had learned to keep himself out of the way of it. But there was something underneath the steadiness. Something held in reserve for 3 years that was now, very carefully, not spilling over. I've been hoping you'd call. The documents are real, Victor said. Not a question, every page. The account has been verified and funded in your name since the day of Thomas's death. It's been accruing for 3 years. Victor looked at the parking lot through the window. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan 3 spaces down. An ordinary Tuesday evening. Ordinary life moving through itself, not knowing or caring what was being said in room 109. I need to meet with you, Victor said. I have a situation that requires immediate attention. The account? That. And something else. A brief pause. Moore's tone shifted, not alarmed, more focused. The way a man's voice changed when he understood the meeting was about more than one thing. What kind of something else? I'll explain in person, Victor said. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Can you do that? I'll make it work. A pause. I'll have coffee ready. Victor set the phone down. Brutus lifted his head from the foot of the bed. Tomorrow, Victor said to the dog. Brutus put his head back down. Outside the window, the neon sign pulsed its broken rhythm. The orange light moved across the ceiling of room 109 the way it had moved across it every night since they arrived. Victor watched it for a while. He thought about Renee, not the last months. He had done enough thinking about the last months. He thought about a regular Tuesday afternoon, maybe 2 years before the diagnosis. Renee on the couch with a book, the boys building a tower out of cardboard boxes in the middle of the living room floor. She'd been laughing at something she was reading, a small private laugh, and she'd looked up and seen him watching her. What? She'd said. Nothing, he'd said. She'd known it wasn't nothing. She'd smiled and gone back to her book. He had stood there for another moment, just looking at her, because he'd had the sense rare, not something he experienced often. He was not a man given to sentimentality, that he was standing in the middle of something that mattered, and he should be present for it. He had been. He was glad. He turned off the desk lamp and lay down on top of the covers and closed his eyes. For the first time since the night he found the envelope, he slept before 2 a.m., not much. But some, and at this point, some was enough. Tomorrow, he would walk into a glass and steel building downtown, with 2 5-year-olds, and a dog and a manila envelope, and 3 years of compounded interest. He would sit across from a man who had been waiting for this meeting longer than Victor had known it was coming. He would learn what he was working with, and then he would build, not fast, right? Those 2 things had never been the same thing, and he had never confused them. He was not about to start now. Jess slept. Theo slept. Gerald the rabbit tucked under Theo's arm. The fire truck in Jesse's grip even in sleep. Victor Briggs lay in the dark of room 109 and listened to his sons breathe. Jess Theo, still here, still here. He closed his eyes and let the morning come. The building was 14 floors of glass and steel. It caught the morning light and threw it back at the street below like it had somewhere better to be. Victor pulled into the parking garage at 7:52, sat in the truck for a moment. Jesse and Theo were in the back seat finishing the last of the motel cereal bars. Brutus was in the passenger seat, looking at the concrete column directly in front of them with the focused attention he gave to things that didn't require focused attention. Which was most things. We're going to visit a man named Mr. Moore, Victor said. Is he nice? Theo asked. I don't know yet. What if he's not nice? Then we leave. Theo considered this. Can I bring Gerald? Gerald stays in the truck. Theo looked at Gerald. Gerald looked back at him with the stuffed blankness of a rabbit who had no opinions about parking garages. Okay, Theo said. They went in. The lobby had marble floors and the kind of air that came out of vents at exactly the right temperature and smelled like nothing. No food, no people, no weather. The controlled absence of everything that made a place feel lived in. Victor's boots hit the floor, and the sound came back at him from 3 directions. The receptionist at the front desk was young and sharp-eyed. Her expression moved through 3 separate recalculations. In the 2 seconds it took her to process Victor, the boys, and Brutus, sir. Victor Briggs. 8 o'clock with Kevin Moore. She looked at Brutus. The dog is a certified service animal, flat, not unfriendly. Final. She picked up the phone. Kevin Moore came out personally to meet them in the lobby. That told Victor something. Men at his level sent assistance. They didn't walk out themselves unless the matter was personal enough to require it. Moore was 58, broad across the shoulders. Close-cropped grey hair, the kind that had come in early, and he'd stopped fighting somewhere in his 40s. His face had the look of a man who had been doing serious work for a long time and had let it show without apology. He walked straight to Victor and put out his hand. Victor shook it. For a moment neither of them spoke, just looked. The way men did when they were deciding whether the other one was what they appeared to be. Whatever Moore found, it was apparently sufficient. "Come on back," he said. His office had windows that looked out over the city in 3 directions. Good coffee on a side table, a proper carafe, 2 mugs, and a small plate of crackers that Jesse identified within 4 seconds of entering the room and thereafter could not stop thinking about. "Those are for you," Moore told him. Jess looked at Moore with the careful, measuring expression he used for new information, took 1 cracker, ate it with deliberate focus. "Thank you," Jesse said. Theo had already found the floor space beside the window and installed Brutus there. He was using the dog as a backrest and looking out at the city below, with the expression of a child who had decided this was an acceptable development. Moore sat across from Victor, opened the file he had apparently been maintaining for 3 years with the careful attention of a man who believed in doing things right, even when nobody was checking. He did not simplify. He did not soften the language or slow it down. He talked to Victor the way you talk to someone you expected to follow the complexity and act on it. Victor noticed, appreciated it without mentioning it. Briggs National Freight, founded by Thomas Briggs Sr. from a single truck and a regional route out of Atlanta. Expanded over 40 years into a 17-state operation. Sold to a private equity group in the last 2 years of Thomas's life. The sale had been strategic. Thomas had known he was dying and wanted the asset liquid before the estate was settled. The proceeds, combined with 40 years of accumulated real estate and investment holdings, formed the core of the trust. "He kept track of you," Moore said. Victor looked at him. "Your grandfather. He hired a firm to follow your life from a distance. Public records, news, anything available without crossing legal lines." Moore paused. "He knew about your military service, West Point, the Navy, your deployment rotations as far as the records allowed. He knew about Renee. He knew your sons were born." The room held that for a moment. Jess had taken a second cracker. He was feeding small pieces of it to Brutus, who was accepting them with the patience of a dog who understood that maintaining goodwill with 5-year-olds was part of his operational role. "He never reached out," Victor said. "No. Why?" Moore was quiet. The careful kind of quiet. The kind that meant he had thought about the answer more than once. He was a man who had made a decision when he was young, Moore said finally. And he built his whole sense of himself around the idea that his decisions were correct. Walking back the one he made about your father would have required admitting the original decision was wrong. And he couldn't find a way to do that. Moore looked at Victor steadily, so he watched. And when he knew he was dying, he did the only thing left available to him. He made sure the money went where his attention should have gone all along. Victor looked out the window. 12 floors down, Atlanta moved through itself. Traffic. People. The ordinary machinery of a city doing its business. "He should have called," Victor said. "Yes," Moore said. "He should have." Neither of them said anything else about it, because there was nothing else to say. The man was dead. The call had not been made. What remained was the wreckage and the money and the question of what to build from here. Victor turned back to the table. "I need liquidity. Not everything. Enough to establish verifiable housing, a proper lease, documentation of stable income, a legal household on paper. I need it clean and I need it fast." Moore nodded. "Already writing. 50,000 transferred within 48 hours for immediate needs. 400,000 by end of week. Enough to secure housing, cover legal fees, establish documentation without touching the core trust. That works. Victor paused. And I need a family law referral. The best available in Atlanta. Moore stopped writing. He looked up. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. The specific attention of a man who had just understood that the meeting was about something different than he'd thought. What's happened? Moore said. Victor reached into his jacket, set the paper on the table between them. The court summons Sandra and Raymond Ashford. Petitioners versus Victor Briggs. Respondent. Emergency petition for temporary custody of Jesse Thomas Briggs and Theodore Aaron Briggs, minors, filed 4 days ago. Hearing date 3 weeks out. Moore read it slowly. His face did not move. They cited PTSD, Victor said. And the dog. Moore set the paper down, looked at it for another moment, then he looked at Victor. Give me 48 hours, he said. I have 21 days, then you have 48 hours, and 19 days after that. He held Victor's gaze. Do you trust me? Victor had trusted people with his life in conditions that didn't allow for deliberation. He knew how to read it. Starting to, he said. Moore almost smiled. That'll do, he said. Jess had finished his crackers. He was watching both men with the quiet, assessing expression he used when he was deciding whether the situation was okay or not okay. Are we good? Jesse said. Both men looked at him. Yeah, buddy, Victor said. We're good. Jesse went back to his drawing. From the floor, without looking up. Can I have another cracker? That was Theo. You can have half, Victor said. Jesse got a whole one. Jesse got here first. A pause. That's not fair. You're right, Victor said. He picked up the plate and handed Theo a whole cracker. Don't tell Jesse, Jess, not looking up. I can hear you, Brutus exhaled. Long and slow. The sound of a dog who had heard this particular argument before and had developed opinions about it. Victor looked at his boys. Underneath the ordinary noise of a Monday morning in a lawyer's office, something had shifted. Because of Renee. Because whatever she'd put in that chest, she'd put it there deliberately. She'd been dying and she'd spent some of the time she didn't have making sure he would have what he needed. She hadn't known exactly what was coming, but she had known her parents, and she had known him. She had prepared him. Victor did not move fast. He moved correctly. He had learned the difference in places that didn't allow for second chances. The most dangerous moment was the one right after you discovered your advantage. That was when people made errors they couldn't walk back. He had seen it happen to good men who knew better, and still couldn't slow down once they felt the ground shift. He was not going to be that. The apartment was on the east side, 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms. A kitchen that got afternoon light through the window above the sink. Solid, clean. The kind of place that looked like a decision rather than a compromise. He signed the lease Thursday morning. Paid 3 months up front. The $50,000 from Moore had landed Wednesday evening, exactly as promised. The property manager was a man in his mid-60s who watched Victor sign with Brutus sitting beside the chair like a piece of very alert furniture. Kids are a deposit issue, the man said, not unkindly. Just honest, bill me, Victor said. He moved them in that afternoon. There wasn't much. The 2 trash bags, the duffel, Brutus's supplies and medication, and the collapsible bowl. A paper bag of things bought at Target that week, toiletries. Children's books found in a donation bin outside the library branch near the motel, a coffee maker. Because some things were not negotiable even under field conditions. Jesse and Theo ran through the empty apartment twice before reaching a verdict on the bedroom. They chose the one with the window that faced a tree. Theo said the tree had a face. Jess said it didn't. But he didn't argue about the room. Victor set up their beds first, then the kitchen. Then he sat on the floor of the empty living room with his back against the wall and looked at the space. He allowed himself exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes to feel the weight of what the last 2 weeks had been. The motel, the parking lot, the park, the envelope, the number. All of it. Then he stood up. There was work to do. The VA appointment was the following Tuesday. He had called the behavioral health clinic on Monday morning. Not to fight. He knew how that went. He'd been in that system long enough to understand the difference between fighting it and navigating it. He made an appointment for a formal updated evaluation. Voluntary, not because Patricia Cole told him to, because the existing record was incomplete. And an incomplete record in the hands of someone like the Ashford family's attorney was a liability. The doctor was a woman in her late 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the kind of face that had heard everything and wasn't surprised by any of it. She looked at him across the desk with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who had stopped needing people to perform their wellness for her a long time ago. When did you last sleep more than 5 hours, she said. Last week. Couple of nights. Before that? He thought about it honestly. Probably before my wife died, she wrote something down, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, rate them on a scale, 4 most nights. Sometimes a 6. Nothing that takes me out. She looked at him over the top of her glasses, not skeptical. Just reading. I'm not here to make it disappear, he said. I know it doesn't disappear. I'm asking you to document what it actually is, not what someone else's lawyer is going to describe it as. She held his gaze for a moment. A long one, then she picked up her pen. 40 minutes, she asked, and he answered. All of it. Honest and exact, the way he gave tactical reports. No inflation, no minimizing, just the actual landscape as he found it. At the end, she set the pen down. What I see, she said, is a man under extraordinary pressure managing it with extraordinary discipline. That is not the same as a man who presents a risk to his children. She paused. I'll have the evaluation to your attorney by Friday. He stood to leave, Mr. Briggs. He turned. More than 5 hours. Make it a goal. Working on it, he said. He almost meant it. The school enrollment happened the same week. Both boys registered. Orientation the following Monday. Jesse's teacher noted in the intake form that he had asked whether the classroom had a library section. It did. Jesse had received this information with contained satisfaction. Theo asked whether Brutus could visit. The teacher said perhaps, for show and tell. Theo considered this a firm commitment. At night, after the boys were in bed, Victor sat at the kitchen table and worked through the legal documents Moore had forwarded. The trust structure, the account details, the letters from Thomas's estate. He read them not as relief but as tools. Every piece of paper was a resource. Every resource had a specific application. His job was to understand the architecture before the hearing, so that nothing caught him sideways. He was 12 days out from the court date. 12 days was enough. It had to be. The knock came on a Saturday morning. Victor was making eggs. The boys were still in their pajamas at the kitchen table. Jesse was working on a drawing red lines, moving across white paper in what appeared to be some kind of map. Theo was telling Brutus a detailed story about Gerald the rabbit and a dragon who had been misunderstood. Victor heard the knock and already knew before he reached the door that it wasn't Mrs. Linda Dorsey from the second floor. Mrs. Dorsey knocked 3 times, quick, and always called out her name at the same time. This was 2 knocks slow. He opened the door. Sandra Ashford stood in the hallway, dark slacks, a cream blouse, hair pulled back exactly as always. She had not called, had not texted, had simply appeared at his door on a Saturday morning the way people appeared when they wanted to demonstrate that they still had access to spaces you thought were yours. She looked past him immediately, into the apartment, taking it in. The kitchen table, the boys, the drawings on the refrigerator, the coffee maker, the books stacked on the counter. She moved her eyes through the room the way you moved your eyes through a space you were evaluating. Not visiting, Sandra, Victor said, a greeting. Just a word. I came to talk to you directly, she said. Her voice was the same temperature it had always been, which was no temperature at all. I think that's more respectful than going through lawyers, is it? Anne doesn't have to be difficult, Victor. She looked at him then, not past him, at him. This situation has become uncomfortable for everyone. I think if we talked honestly, we could find an arrangement that works better. For the children, he repeated. They need stability. They need consistency. They've been through a tremendous loss. A pause. Precisely calculated. Raymond and I can offer them things that, given your current circumstances, you may not be able to. Victor looked at her. He thought about the night in room 109. The orange pulse through the curtains. The sound that had come out of him that he would not have chosen if anyone was listening. He thought about Theo's hand on his arm in the grey pre-dawn light. He thought about a little boy pressing Gerald against his cheek in a motel bed, and a father who had not grabbed the right books but had told a story anyway. With what he had, the way you always did things with what you had. He thought about Renee. About what Renee would have said if she could have seen this moment. Her mother standing in a doorway that was not her mother's doorway. Using the word stability like a weapon. Using the word children like a shield. Renee would not have been angry. That had always been the thing about her. She would have been sad, because she understood, in the way she understood most things, that her mother was not a cruel person by design. She was a frightened one, frightened of what she couldn't control, frightened of what she couldn't understand. And frightened people reached for power the way drowning people reach for anything that wasn't water. but understanding why someone did a thing did not make the thing acceptable. Victor kept one hand on the door frame, did not step back, did not invite her in. "You just told me," he said, "to think about what's best for my children." Sandra waited. "I am," he said. He closed the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment, heard her heels on the floor outside, heard the elevator. Then he went back to the kitchen. "Who was that?" Jesse asked. Not looking up from his map. "Someone I know." Jesse considered this. "Were they nice?" Victor picked up the spatula. "Not particularly." Jess went back to his map. Theo, still talking to Brutus, had apparently concluded the part of his story where the dragon was misunderstood and had moved on to the part where the dragon found a friend. Victor made the eggs. He put them on 2 plates, cut the toast, poured orange juice, set everything on the table and sat down across from his sons. Outside the kitchen window, the tree moved in the morning wind. The one Theo said had a face. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his boys. "Eat," he said. They ate. Moore called on a Thursday afternoon. Victor was at his desk in the apartment, a folding table he'd picked up secondhand. Nothing fancy, but level and solid, which was what mattered. Jesse was at the kitchen table with a book. Theo was in the living room explaining to Brutus the structural weaknesses of a dragon's approach to friendship. A narrative that had apparently grown quite complex in the days since Saturday. The call came at 4:17. "I need you to come in Monday morning," Moore said. The controlled quality was back in his voice. The voice of a man who had looked at something and was being careful with it before he moved. "I found something." "What kind of something?" "The kind that changes the shape of the whole situation." A pause. "I'd rather show you in person." Victor was quiet for a moment. "Monday, 8 o'clock?" 8 o'clock, Moore confirmed. Victor set the phone down. Jess looked up from his book. "Who was that?" "Our lawyer." Jesse processed this. "Is it good or bad?" "Don't know yet." Victor paused. "But we're going to find out." Jesse returned to his book. That was the thing about Jesse. He didn't press. He asked what he needed to ask and then let the answer be what it was. Renee had been like that too. She had a way of receiving information, good or bad, that didn't add anything to it, didn't dramatize it, just took it in and figured out what to do next. Victor was still learning that skill. He was making progress. Monday came gray and even Moore's office had coffee again. This time also a box of donuts, which Jesse located within 5 seconds of entering the room. Theo was on the floor with Brutus, pointing out the city below through the window, and explaining to the dog which buildings were probably friendly and which ones looked suspicious. Moore waited until both boys were settled before he opened the folder on the desk and turned it to face Victor. "The Renee Ashford Memorial Fund," he said. Victor looked at the page. Official letterhead. A non-profit filing registered in the state of Georgia. Date of incorporation. 6 weeks after Renee's funeral named for his wife who had been dead for 6 weeks when someone decided her name was useful. He read it. The fund was structured as a charitable organization. Cancer Research and Patient Support Services. It had been launched publicly with a press release and a photograph. Renee's photograph taken from what appeared to be a family event, her smiling in a way that made Victor's jaw tighten without him making the decision to tighten it. And it had raised money, more than $1.4 million in 4 months. Corporate donors, community fundraising, a gala in March with a live auction and a keynote speaker from a local hospital. All in Renee's name, all without his knowledge, all without her knowledge, which was the part that settled the heaviest. "Keep going," Moore said quietly. Page 4. The fund's administrative and operational costs were managed by an outside consulting firm contracted at the time of the fund's founding. The firm's name was listed. Moore had attached a second sheet, a corporate registry document from the state of Georgia. The consulting firm had been incorporated 8 months before the Memorial Fund was established. Sole owner, 3 degrees of corporate separation from Raymond Ashford's personal name. 3 holding companies, each one a shell inside another shell. But Moore had drawn a line through it in pen, step by step, each link documented, each registration on file. Victor set the page down. He sat very still. This was how he processed things that made him furious. Not movement, not volume. Total stillness. The kind that came from years of learning that action disconnected from calculation was just noise. And noise in the wrong situation got people killed. "How much went to the consulting firm?" he said. In the first 4 months of operation, Moore said $840,000, nearly $1 million. In Renee's name, from people who had loved her, who had come to a gala and bid on auction items and written checks, because they wanted to do something meaningful with their grief. With their love for a woman who had mattered to them. She didn't know this existed, Victor said. His voice was flat, factual. Holding itself level through discipline, she passed 6 weeks before the incorporation date. Victor looked at the window. The city outside moved through itself the way it always did. Indifferent. Continuous. He brought himself back. Is this enough for court? Not on its own. We need a forensic accountant to trace the complete money flow before any of it becomes admissible. Moore leaned forward slightly. But there may be something that accelerates it. Something in your possession. He looked at Victor with the careful attention of a man who had learned to ask the right question rather than the most obvious one. Did Renee keep records? Personal financial documents. Anything she might have gathered on her own in the last months. Victor was quiet. The cedar chest. He had brought it in from the truck the first night in the apartment. Set it in the corner of his bedroom against the wall. Run his hand once across the lid and told himself he would open it when he was ready. He had walked past it every day since. He had not been ready. Maybe, he said. Anything in Renee's handwriting would carry weight with this judge, Moore said. Family court pays attention to what the person who isn't in the room was trying to communicate, especially when that person took deliberate steps to communicate it. Victor stood. I'll look tonight, he said. Moore nodded. Jesse had finished his donut and was watching both of them with the quiet, assessing expression he used when he was deciding whether the situation was okay or not okay. Are we good? Jesse said. Both men looked at him. Yeah, buddy, Victor said. We're good. Jess went back to his drawing, Theo, from the floor. Can I have a donut? You can have half. Jesse got a whole one. Jesse got here first, a pause. That's not fair. You're right, Victor said. He handed Theo a whole donut. Don't tell Jesse. Jesse, not looking up. I can hear you, Brutus exhaled. Long and slow, Victor looked at his boys and let that small, ordinary noise fill the room for a moment. Let it be what it was. Evidence that they were here, that they were his, that whatever was in that chest, whatever Renee had left for him to find, she had believed he would know what to do with it. She had always believed that. He drove home, parked, sat in the driver's seat for 60 seconds without moving. Brutus put his chin on the center console. Okay, Victor said. He got out. He got the boys through dinner, pasta. Garlic bread because Jesse had decided garlic bread was his primary food preference, and Victor saw no reason to complicate that. Theo set the table with the concentration of someone who understood that certain things had a right way and a wrong way, and the right way mattered. He got them through the bath. Through 2 chapters from the library book about the family of raccoons who kept getting into situations that Jesse found structurally implausible and Theo found hilarious. He sat with them until they were both asleep. Jess first, then Theo. With Gerald against his cheek and his thumb in his mouth, and his face smoothed out the way children's faces smoothed in sleep. All the work of the day gone out of it. Victor stayed on the edge of the mattress for a long time after that, just listening to them breathe. Then he went to his bedroom and sat down on the floor in front of the cedar chest. It was a good piece of furniture. Old. The wood was a reddish-brown, worn smooth along the top edge from years of hands resting on it. A simple latch on the front. No lock. Renee had kept it at the foot of their bed for years. He had never asked what was inside. She had told him once that it was where she kept things she wasn't ready to throw away and wasn't ready to look at. He had understood that completely. He had sat in front of this chest 3 times since moving into the apartment. Each time he had touched the lid and not lifted it. Tonight was different. He lifted the lid. The smell came first. Cedar and old paper and something faintly floral. A lavender sachet tucked in the corner, dried almost to nothing. Her smell, not exactly. But close enough that he had to stop for a moment and just breathe. He breathed, then he looked. Photographs, rubber banded in a small stack. A piece of jewelry, her grandmother's ring, the one she'd said she wanted Jesse to give to someone someday. A book with a cracked spine, the kind that got that way from being read many times. A small square of pale yellow fabric, a baby blanket. Both boys had used it, worn soft and almost transparent from washing. And underneath all of that, an envelope, his name on the front in her handwriting. The letters slightly larger than her usual script. The way she wrote when she was being careful, he picked it up. His hands were steady. He noticed that he opened it. 3 pages. Her handwriting changed across the 3 pages in a way he recognized from the last months. The letters uneven in the second half. The pen pressure lighter. The signs of a body losing ground day by day. but still insisting on saying the thing that needed to be said. He read, "She had always known. Not precisely, not with documentation, but in the way you knew things about people you had lived around your whole life. She knew her mother had a particular relationship with truth, that it was a tool for Sandra, not a standard. She knew her father had spent 40 years agreeing with Sandra about everything, because the alternative required a kind of courage Raymond had never developed. She knew they had never fully accepted Victor, not because of anything he had done, but because accepting him would have meant accepting the choice she had made, and they had never been people who accepted choices they hadn't approved first. She had chosen Victor anyway. She wrote that plainly, without defensiveness, not as rebellion, not as proof of anything, because he was the only person she had ever known who was honest all the way through, who meant what he said, who, when things were hard, did not look for a version of events that made him comfortable, who just looked at what was actually there. "I married you because you were real," she wrote. And real is the rarest thing. Victor had to set the pages down for a moment. He looked at the ceiling, took a breath, picked them up again. The third page was different, folded separately inside the letter. A smaller sheet of paper, a different weight, photocopies, bank documents, transaction records, dates, amounts, account numbers, transfer authorizations. She had been a partial signatory on a family account during the early years of her parents' business operations. She had retained access longer than they probably realized. In the last months of her life, in the hours when she felt well enough to sit up, she had gone through those records methodically and copied what she found. "I don't know what this means," she wrote. "I don't know if it's anything, but I know my parents. And I know that whatever happens after I'm gone, you're going to need to be able to show people who they are. I trust you to know what to do with this. I always have, below that, separated by a space, one more line, protect our boys. Not from everything, from the things that actually matter. You know the difference. You've always known the difference." Victor sat on the floor of his bedroom for a long time, not crying, past that point for tonight, just present in the room with the letter in his hands and the cedar smell around him and the muffled sound of his sons breathing in the next room. And Brutus. A warm weight against his leg. She had not been able to fight. She had been 32 years old and dying. Everything she had gone to staying alive as long as she could. For them. For him, but she had found these hours. She had used them deliberately. She had believed he would need this, and she had believed he would know what to do with it. He folded the photocopies carefully. Set them on top of the documents from Moore. Looked at the combined pile, not enough on its own, but with what Moore had already found, with the forensic accountant Moore would bring in, with everything Victor had spent the last 3 weeks building: the lease, the apartment, the VA evaluation, the school enrollment, the life on paper that reflected the life he was actually living. It was enough to change the shape of what happened next. He put the letter back in the chest, gently. With the photographs and the baby blanket and the ring and all the other things Renee had kept when she wasn't ready to let go. Closed the lid. Stood up, he looked at the door of his son's room. Opened 2 inches the way it always was at night so he could hear them. He turned off the light, got into bed, and slept for 7 hours without waking once, which was not a small thing for the man he had been 3 weeks ago. In room 109 of the Sunrise Motel, with $38 and 2 garbage bags and no destination. It was everything. Outside, Atlanta moved through the dark the way it always did. And in a bedroom down the hall, 2 small boys slept without knowing what their mother had done for them. What she had done quietly, deliberately, in the hours she had left. Not with anger, not with fear, with love. The kind of love that didn't need to be witnessed. The kind that just did the work. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old coffee, and the particular weight of people waiting to find out what happened next to their lives. Victor arrived 40 minutes early, not from nerves. He had not been nervous in the clinical sense since a situation in his second deployment that had burned the capacity out of him permanently, which he had eventually decided was more useful than the alternative. He arrived early because he always arrived early. Because early meant time to read the terrain. He walked the hallways, found the courtroom, located the exits, identified the bench nearest the door where he could see both approaches at once. Old habit, but habits that kept you alive had a way of becoming permanent. Patricia Cole arrived 12 minutes after him. She was 51, small and precise. The kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and moved through rooms like the outcome was already decided, and she was just there to execute it. 15 years in family court, she carried it not as weight but as precision. The way a surgeon carried the sum of everything they'd cut through and closed up and learned from. She shook Victor's hand without preamble. "How are you feeling?" she said. "Ready?" She read him for a moment. Whatever she found confirmed something. "Stay exactly like that," she said. Kevin Moore arrived 3 minutes later with 2 associates carrying accordion files thick enough to require both arms. He nodded at Victor, set everything down on their side of the long table, and began organizing with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this particular kind of preparation many times, and had stopped being impressed by the volume of paper it generated. The boys were not here. Victor had arranged that 2 weeks ago, the same day he'd enrolled them in the Tuesday morning art program at the community center 4 blocks from the apartment, Mrs. Linda Dorsey. His neighbor on the second floor, a woman in her early 70s with 2 grown sons and a corgi named Biscuit, and the kind of warm, unhurried steadiness that made children trust her, within 10 minutes had offered to take them for the morning. Theo had asked 3 separate questions about whether Biscuit would be available. Jess had asked whether he would miss anything important at school. Victor had addressed both concerns and gotten them out the door, and then sat in the truck in the parking garage for 4 minutes before driving to the courthouse. Brutus was in the truck window cracked, water in the collapsible bowl behind the seat. The dog was fine. The dog was constitutionally equipped for waiting. It was Victor who needed to be fine now. The Ashfords arrived at 8:52. Sandra came in first dark blue dress, understated and expensive. Every element of her appearance built to project a specific image. The responsible grandmother, the stable presence, the adult in the room who had been carrying things. Her posture was immaculate. She did not look at Victor when she entered. Raymond followed. He looked smaller than Victor remembered, or maybe the Ashford house had made him seem larger than he was. All that marble and mahogany doing work that Raymond's actual person couldn't do on its own. Here, under fluorescent lights, in a room with hard wooden benches and no imported anything, he was just a man in an expensive suit who hadn't slept well. Their attorney scanned Victor's table as he entered, took in Patricia Cole, took in Moore and his associates and the stacked accordion files. Something moved through his expression. Something that was almost recalibration. Then he smoothed it and took his seat. On the way to her own seat, Sandra slowed near Victor's table, stopped, just for a second. "You don't have anything to gain here, Victor," she said quietly. "Not a threat. A statement delivered the way you read off a memo you'd already approved. Let it be handled properly." Victor looked at her, completely calm. "The court will handle it properly," he said. Sandra held his gaze a moment longer, searching for something to read in him, not finding it. She moved on. The judge entered at 9 exactly. Honorable Patricia Quarles, 63 years old, 19 years on the family court bench. She had the bearing of a woman who had heard every version of every story and was no longer moved by performance or polish, only by what was documented, only by what was true. She set down her reading glasses and looked at the room. "We're here on Ashford versus Briggs," she said. "Petition for temporary custody of Jesse and Theo Briggs. Minors. I've reviewed the initial filings." She looked at the Ashford attorney. "Your clients filed. You present first." The Ashford attorney was good. Victor gave him that without resentment. He was organized and composed, and he knew exactly how to build a case for a family court judge without appearing to be building one. He didn't go for emotion. Emotion was messy, and judges who'd seen 19 years of it were immune. He went for a word he used 11 times in 40 minutes. Stability. The Ashford home. Established. Consistent. Known. 2 grandparents with roots in the community. A house the children had lived in for 6 months. Resources that did not require improvisation. Mr. Briggs's situation. He presented it the way you presented something you were being reluctant about. Carefully, almost apologetically, as though the facts themselves were unfortunate rather than the argument being constructed from them. The motel, the recent lease, weeks old, no extended family network, no community ties. The documented mental health history not sensationalized, just stated calmly, with the particular deadliness of understatement. A record of PTSD treatment with documented gaps in consistent care, not a claim that Victor was dangerous, something subtler. Something that planted a question in the mind of a person who would have to make a decision and live with it. Could they be certain? And then the attorney had brought in a psychologist who had reviewed the case file. The psychologist testified to general principles about large working breed animals with specialized training in domestic settings with young children. He did not say Brutus had ever harmed anyone. He did not say Brutus had ever threatened anyone. He said could present. He said potential for unpredictable response. He said in an abundance of caution, all of it conditional, all of it theoretical, all of it aimed at a single target, doubt. Victor sat through all of it with his hands flat on the table in front of him, still. He had learned this in rooms much more dangerous than courtrooms. The discipline of listening to things that were wrong without giving the wrongness anywhere to land on your face. Reaction was data. Reaction could be clipped and presented and turned into a narrative. He gave them nothing. Patricia put a hand briefly on his forearm at one point. Not a warning, just acknowledgement. He nodded without turning his head. When the Ashford attorney finished, Patricia stood. She did not use the word stability once. She used facts, the lease, the apartment, documented, inspected, photographed as part of the standard filing. A home with furniture and food and books and 2 beds chosen by 2 small boys. Because of a tree outside the window they could see from where they slept. The psychological evaluation from the VA clinic submitted complete, not excerpted, not summarized, because the full document told the actual truth. The evaluating physician had written it plainly. A man under extraordinary pressure, managing it with extraordinary discipline. Not the same as a man who presents a risk to his children. Patricia read it aloud without embellishment. The school enrollment, both boys registered, both attending, both with teacher notes already in the file, adjusting well, engaged. The older twin had shown particular interest in the classroom library, the character statements. 3 men who had served alongside Victor, not abstract praise. Specific accounts of how he functioned under pressure, how he made decisions when conditions were bad, how he treated the people around him when no one was watching and it cost him nothing to do otherwise. And then the service record. Because the Ashford attorney had introduced the PTSD diagnosis as evidence of unfitness, and the correct response to that was context, not argument, Patricia read the dates, the deployments, the actions for which each commendation had been awarded. She read them in the flat, steady voice of someone presenting a document, not performing one. The courtroom went quiet in a specific way, not politely quiet. The kind of quiet that meant people had stopped thinking about what they were going to say next and were just listening. Judge Quarles had stopped writing. Her pen was still on the pad. She was looking at Patricia. The Ashford attorney objected once. Relevance. Your client raised Mr. Briggs's mental health record as evidence of parental unfitness, Patricia said without turning from the bench. The court is entitled to the full context that record exists within. Quarles overruled. Continue. When Patricia set the papers down, she stood straight. Victor Briggs served this country in conditions that would have broken most people, she said. He came home and cared for a terminally ill wife while raising 2 toddlers, managing his own health and maintaining the household without complaint and without additional support. When his wife died, he was removed from his housing by her family. In the 5 weeks since that removal, he has secured a signed lease, enrolled his children in school, completed a voluntary psychiatric evaluation, and appeared before this court. She paused. That is not instability. That is a father doing everything that can be asked of him and more. Another pause. The dog has a clean behavioral record spanning 7 years of active service and 3 years of domestic life. He has a current health certificate, a current behavioral assessment from a certified animal specialist, and has never, in his documented history, shown aggression toward a person. We have submitted that assessment as Exhibit F. She sat. Under the table, Victor let out a breath he'd been holding for the better part of an hour. Then the Ashford attorney asked to call Victor to the stand. Patricia leaned close. You don't have to, I know, Victor said. He stood, he walked to the witness stand, sat, adjusted the microphone downward. It had been set for someone taller. The attorney approached with the measured confidence of a man on his own terrain. He'd done this thousands of times. He knew how to work a witness. He knew how to ask questions that looked like questions but were actually architecture, each one adding a beam to the structure he was building in the mind of the person watching. He started measured, Garandal, military service. Timeline of Renee's illness. The circumstances at the Ashford residence then. Mr. Briggs, you were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, the attorney paused. He hadn't finished the question. In 2019, Victor continued. After my second deployment, I've been in treatment since then, more consistently since my wife's diagnosis. The evaluation submitted to this court this morning reflects my current status in full. There were gaps in that treatment. There were. When you're driving your wife to chemotherapy 3 times a week and managing 2 toddlers on a military pension, appointments sometimes fall through. That's documented and explained in the evaluation your court received this morning. A sound from the gallery, not laughter. Something closer to recognition. Judge Quarles did not look up, but her pen moved slightly. The attorney adjusted. The motel, he said. You and your children lived in a motel for 11 days. Yes. After being asked to leave the Ashford residence. After being told to leave, with 11 days' notice and 2 trash bags, a beat, your children were in a motel room with a large dog. For 11 days they were with their father, Victor said. And their dog, and you consider that an appropriate environment for? No, Victor said. It wasn't appropriate, it was what we had. There's a difference between what's appropriate and what you do. When the people sitting at that table have just put you on the street with $38 and 2 5-year-olds and nowhere to go. The attorney turned to the bench. Your Honor, he's answering the question, Quarles said. The attorney turned back. He tried 3 more approaches. Each time, Victor answered with the same quality, direct, precise, no performance, just the actual landscape described as it was. And then the attorney made a mistake. Not a large one. A fraction of a degree. The kind of thing that looked like a reasonable question and wasn't, Mr. Briggs, he said. Would your wife have been comfortable with the circumstances her children are currently living in? The courtroom went very still. Victor looked at him. Did not look away. He sat with the question for a moment. Not because he didn't have an answer. Because the answer deserved to be said correctly. My wife, Victor said, spent the last 4 months of her life unable to sit up on her own most mornings. She lost 40 pounds. She was in pain every day. And every time I walked into her room, every single time the first thing she asked was how the boys were. Not about her treatment, not about herself. About them, his voice was level. Not loud, not strained. She would be comfortable with where they are living because I am their father, and she knew exactly who I was. She chose me, not because she had no other options, because she knew nobody else moved. The attorney did not ask another question. He went back to his table. Victor walked back to his. Patricia waited until he was seated. Then she stood, Mr. Briggs, in the 11 days at the Sunrise Motel. After your sons went to sleep, what did you do? Victor thought about it honestly. Counted the money, he said. Tried to figure out what came next. Read the same documents about 50 times. Did you read to your sons? Every night. I didn't have books with me. So I told them a story from memory. One their mother used to tell. Did you remember all of it? No, he said. I did the best I could. Patricia nodded once. No further questions, she said. Then Kevin Moore stood. And this was the part the Ashford attorney had not prepared for. He had built his case on a specific foundation. Victor Briggs was a man without resources, without support, without the structural stability required to raise 2 small children against the backdrop of his documented psychological history. Everything the attorney had put into evidence pointed at that foundation like spokes on a wheel. Moore removed the foundation. Patricia, no. Moore moved the financial documentation first. The trust, the account, the legal establishment of Victor's assets as of 3 weeks prior. He presented it not as a dramatic revelation, but as a simple correction of the record. The claim of financial instability was no longer a claim that could be made. It was simply no longer true. The Ashford attorney looked at the documents. His expression did not break, but it rearranged itself around a new set of facts. The rearrangement was visible to anyone watching closely enough. Victor was watching closely enough. Then Moore said, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to introduce evidence pertaining to the character and conduct of the petitioners in this case. The attorney was on his feet. Objection. Relevance. The petitioners have represented themselves to this court as the stable, responsible, emotionally appropriate alternative caregivers for these children, Moore said. The court should have complete information when evaluating that representation. Quarles looked at Moore, looked at the documents he was holding, looked at the Ashford attorney. Overruled, she said. Proceed. What Moore presented was not dramatic. That was the thing about it. There was no moment of theatrical revelation. No raised voice. No pause for effect. Just documents presented sequentially, each one building on the one before it. The kind of presentation that was more devastating than theater, because it was simply true, and it kept being true across every page. the Renee Ashford Memorial Fund. Incorporated 6 weeks after Renee's death, without the knowledge or consent of her widower or her estate. Fundraising materials bearing Renee's photograph and the story of her illness, deployed to solicit donations from a community that had loved her and wanted to do something meaningful with that love. More than $1.4 million raised in 4 months. Corporate donors, community events, a gala with a live auction, and then the money trail. Moore walked through it without inflection. The consulting firm, the management and administrative fees, the corporate registry. Raymond Ashford's name at the end of a 3-step chain of holding companies, each one a legal person created for the purpose of being between Raymond and the thing he was doing. The forensic accountant's report was the final document, 47 pages, conservative language, precise numbers, unambiguous conclusions 840, 00 moved from charitable donations made in Renee's name into accounts controlled by Raymond Ashford. And then the last exhibit, the photocopied bank records Renee had gathered in the final months of her life. Transaction records she had compiled, organized, and placed in a cedar chest with a letter to her husband explaining what they were and what she believed he would need to do with them. Moore read one line from the letter aloud. Just one. Quarles had ruled that the letter itself was not admissible as evidence, but one line could be read into the record as context for the documents. I know them. And I know that whatever happens after I'm gone, you're going to need to be able to show people who they are. The courtroom was a specific kind of quiet after that, not the polite quiet of people being attentive. The quiet of people who had just heard something that made them rearrange what they thought they were watching. Sandra sat straight, still straight, but her hands, folded on the table in front of her, had shifted. The knuckles were different. Raymond had gone entirely motionless. Not the stillness of a man listening. The stillness of a man who has understood, in real time, that the walls have moved and the room he thought he was in is not the room he is in. The attorney leaned to Raymond and said something very quietly. Raymond picked up his pen, set it back down, did not respond. Judge Quarles looked at the documents for a long time, unhurried. Reading carefully, the room waited. She looked up at the Ashford table, then at Victor. She held his gaze for a moment, just a moment. Whatever she saw there, she absorbed without comment. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," she said. "I'd like to see counsel from both parties in chambers." The hallway outside the courtroom had the quality of a waiting room that had given up on being comfortable, hard benches. A water fountain at the far end that ran slightly warm, a window that looked out onto the side of another building. Victor sat on the bench nearest the courtroom door, with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them. He did not check his phone, did not pace. Just sat and let the 30 minutes be 30 minutes. He thought about things that had nothing to do with the courtroom. He thought about the park near the motel, Jesse discovering the slack at the top of the swing arc, Theo's absolute conviction that being pushed was better than pumping, no matter how many times Jesse explained the mechanics of it. He thought about the apartment. The morning light through the kitchen window, the sound of the boys eating breakfast, the tree outside their bedroom window that Theo could see a face in, and Jesse couldn't, and the morning 2 weeks ago when Jesse had looked at it for a long time and said quietly that he could maybe see it if he looked at the right spot. He thought about Renee, not the last months. He'd done enough thinking about the last months. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon that had been completely ordinary. Renee on the couch with a book. The boys building a tower out of cardboard boxes in the middle of the living room floor. She'd been laughing at something she was reading, a small private laugh, and she'd looked up and seen him watching her. "What?" she'd said. "Nothing," he'd said. She'd known it wasn't nothing. She'd smiled and gone back to her book. He had stood there for another moment, just looking at her, because he'd had the sense rare, not something he experienced often. He was not a man given to sentimentality, that he was standing in the middle of something that mattered, and he should be present for it. He had been. He was glad. The chamber door opened. Patricia came out first. Her expression was controlled in the specific way she controlled things when she was carrying information she needed to deliver carefully. She walked to the bench, sat beside him. "It's done," she said. He looked at her, full custody, sole legal and physical. "Effective immediately upon filing of the final order, which will happen today." She paused. "Judge Quarles is also referring the fund documentation to the State Attorney General's office. That becomes a separate matter, civil, and potentially criminal outside our case. But it's moving. Victor looked at the floor between his feet. Supervised contact for the Ashfords, Patricia continued. 2 hours per month at a neutral location with a licensed family mediator present. They can petition for modification in 12 months, he nodded. You can petition to have it removed entirely, she said. Given the fund situation, you have grounds right now. He was quiet. I'll wait, he said. Let the boys decide when they're old enough. If they want a relationship with their grandparents, that should come from them. Patricia looked at him for a moment. She started. It's what Renee would have done, he said. She didn't write them off in her letter. She just told the truth about them and left it to me. Patricia didn't add anything to that. She sounds like she was remarkable, she said. She was completely ordinary, Victor said. She was a regular person who just did everything right. All the ordinary things. Just right? He paused. That's harder than it sounds, he stood. Shook Patricia's hand. Then Moore's. Then each of the two associates, who looked like they'd been awake since 5 in the morning, running on coffee, and the awareness that something significant had happened in that room. Then he walked down the hallway toward the exit. He passed the area outside the chambers where the Ashfords had been seated while their attorney was inside. Raymond was sitting in a chair against the wall. Jacket off, tie loosened. His hands were in his lap, and he was looking at them with the expression of a man who has set down something he'd been carrying for a long time, and is only now in the setting down understanding how heavy it actually was. Sandra was standing 6 feet away from him, not beside him, not touching him, standing separately. Facing the window at the end of the hall, Victor could see her from the side. The posture still there, still immaculate, the cream blouse still buttoned, but her face had opened somewhere, not completely. Just a crack. Just enough for something underneath the control to show through at the corner of one eye, and she was holding it closed through an act of will that showed in the set of her jaw and the stillness of everything else. Victor slowed. He hadn't planned to stop. He had his keys in his hand. He had a truck in the garage and a neighbor with a corgi and 2 boys waiting to find out what had happened. He had planned to walk straight through those doors and not look back. He stopped. Sandra turned, saw him, did not look away. She didn't speak. She waited with the rigid composure of a woman who had not permitted herself to flinch at anything in 60 years and was not going to begin now. Victor looked at her, not with contempt, not with the satisfaction of a man who has won something, just looked. The way you looked at something that had been a threat and was no longer a threat and required no further energy. You had 2 grandsons, he said. His voice was quiet, factual. Not a performance of restraint, just restraint, actual and complete. You had them for 6 months. Every morning, every dinner, every day they grew and learned something new. He paused. That's what you lost. I want you to understand that completely. Not the house, not the argument, the boys. That's what's gone. He didn't wait for a response. There was no response that would have changed anything. He walked past Raymond, who did not look up, through the double doors at the end of the corridor, down the courthouse steps, and out into the morning, which had gone clear and bright while they'd all been inside, the kind of November light that was thin and clean and made everything look precise. He stood on the steps for a moment, just stood, just breathed. Let the light hit his face. Then he walked to the parking garage. Brutus was sitting up in the passenger seat when Victor reached the truck, watching the approach, ears forward, assessing the way he always assessed, the way he had been trained to assess and had never quite stopped, even after the training was formally over. Victor opened the door and got in. Brutus immediately pushed his nose into the side of Victor's neck. Firm, deliberate, the dog's version of checking for damage. Victor put his hand on the back of the dog's head. We're good, he said. Brutus exhaled, settled. Put his chin on the center console. Victor started the truck. Mrs. Linda Dorsey's house smelled like coffee cake and dog, and the specific warmth of a home that had been lived in well for a long time. She opened the door before he knocked, looked at his face. Understood, thank God, she said. Theo arrived at full speed from somewhere in the hallway. Both arms outstretched, hit Victor's knees at velocity. Victor caught him. Went down on one knee. Got both arms around both boys, because Jesse had followed at a different pace, slower, but no less certain, pressing in from the side, with his hands gripping his father's jacket and his face tucked against Victor's shoulder. Victor held on. He didn't say anything for a moment. Just held them. Let the weight of them be what it was, solid and real and present, and his Theo's voice muffled. Did we win? Yeah, buddy. Did Brutus help? Victor looked at the dog, who had followed him to the door and was currently engaged in a greeting ceremony with Biscuit the corgi that involved a great deal of mutual investigation. Brutus helped, Victor said. Jess pulled back, looked at him with that direct, measuring look, checking the actual state of things rather than the reported state of things. Are we going home? Jessie said. Yeah, Victor said. We're going home, Jess nodded once. Definitive. Like a decision had been confirmed that he'd already made internally, and this was just the paperwork. 6 months later, Raymond Ashford was formally charged. Wire fraud and misappropriation of charitable funds. The State Attorney General's office had moved faster than expected. The fund's assets were frozen pending the outcome. If the state recovered them, and more expected they would, the money would be redistributed to legitimate cancer research organizations in Atlanta. Sandra was not charged. She had not been a signatory on any of the relevant accounts. Whether she knew was a different question. It was a question Victor did not spend much time on. Some things were not his to settle. He had 2 boys to raise and a name to rebuild, and only so much room in a day for things that weren't either of those. 3 months after the courthouse, Victor bought a building, not a mansion. He had grown up understanding what those were architecture used as performance, and he had no interest in that. He bought the original Briggs National Freight Facility on the south side of Atlanta. Brick built in the early 70s, solid in the way things were built when people expected them to last. Thomas had started here. 1 truck, 1 route. The company had outgrown the building twice over 40 years, and it had stood empty for 2 years after the private equity group moved operations and left it behind. He didn't announce it, didn't call a reporter, didn't respond to the interview requests that came through Moore's office after the court proceedings became part of the public record. He just opened the doors. He hired Terry Coleman as fleet manager. 53 years old, 30 years in freight logistics. The kind of man who knew every possible way something could go wrong on a truck and had fixed most of them personally. Terry said yes within 48 hours of their first conversation, which told Victor the operation was worth running. 40% of the initial hires were veterans, not from a program, not for optics, because Victor knew how to talk to people from that world and knew what they needed from work, which was the same thing everyone needed. To be trusted, to be paid fairly, to be given problems worth solving. He put his own office in the room Thomas had used. He knew it from a photograph Moore had found in the estate files. A man at a desk, a window looking out onto the loading dock. He didn't feel sentimental about Thomas. He wasn't sure he ever would. The man had watched from a distance for 15 years and never picked up a telephone. That was a choice. Choices had consequences. The consequence was that they had remained strangers and would remain strangers, even now that one of them was gone. But he felt something about the building, the continuity of it. A thing interrupted could be resumed, not the same that wasn't available, and he wouldn't have wanted it anyway. Just resumed. Different hands, different purpose. Same window, same dock. He could work with that. 6 months after the courthouse, on a Saturday morning in December, both boys were asleep, and the apartment was quiet. Victor sat on the couch in the living room without turning on the television. He let the apartment be around him. The lamp on the side table made a yellow circle on the ceiling. The tree outside the boys' window was bare. Now December had taken the last of the leaves, but the shape of it was still there against the dark. And Theo had said that morning that the face was easier to see without the leaves in the way. Jess had stood beside him at the window and looked at it for a long time. Then he'd said, quietly, that Theo was right. It did look like a face. Victor had been in the hallway when that happened. He hadn't said anything. He just stood there and let it exist. Brutus came in from the boys' room and found his spot at the end of the couch. He circled once, settled, put his chin on Victor's knee with the authority of a dog who had earned the right to do exactly that. Victor put his hand on the dog's head. The apartment was quiet, the good kind, not the quiet of absence. The quiet of enough. He thought about Renee. Not with the sharp grief that had lived in his chest for the first year, like something lodged there, with something different. Something that had changed shape over these months without him noticing it changing. She was present the way people became present when you'd stop needing to hold them at a distance because you couldn't bear how far away they were. She was just there, in the way the boys laughed. In the way Jessie read to people without being asked. In the way Theo set the table with total seriousness because Someone had once told him that certain things had a right way and a wrong way. She had done that. She had built things in them that would keep building long after she was gone. And she had built something for him too, not the money. The money was Thomas's mistake corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. What Renee had built was the cedar chest and the letter and the photocopies, and the trust she'd placed in him when she had every reason to be afraid of what came next. She had not been afraid, or she had been, and she'd done what she always did with fear, acknowledge it and keep moving. He didn't know which, he hadn't been able to ask, he wished he'd been able to ask. A sound from the boys' room. Not distress, just movement, the small sound of a child resettling in sleep, then quiet again. Jesse. Theo still here. He looked at the ceiling for a while longer. The lamp made its circle. The tree stood in the dark outside. Brutus breathed against his knee. He thought about the parking lot of the Sunrise Motel. 2 trash bags. $38. An engine that coughed before it caught. Theo asking about the new house, and the lie that had tasted like ash on the way out. He thought about room 109, the neon sign with the dead letter. Ohio on the ceiling. He thought about sitting on the floor at 2 in the morning, with a document in his hands, and a number that didn't change no matter how many times he read it. He thought about Renee's handwriting getting smaller, and less even across the bottom of the 3rd page. Protect our boys. Not from everything. From the things that actually matter. You know the difference. He would. Tomorrow he would get up and make breakfast and drive to the loading dock and do the work of building something worth building. And come home to this apartment. This quiet. These 2 boys who were growing and becoming themselves in ways that surprised him constantly and delighted him quietly and occasionally made him have to leave the room for a moment so they didn't see his face. This was not everything. He knew that. He wasn't pretending it was everything. There was a shape missing from it that would always be missing, and he had made his peace with carrying that shape for the rest of his life. But this was enough, more than enough. He took his hand off the dog's head, leaned back into the couch, closed his eyes. Outside, the December wind moved through the bare tree. The lamp made its circle on the ceiling. Victor Briggs sat in the quiet of a life he was building in an apartment his sons had chosen because of a tree with a face, in a city that didn't know or care what it had taken to get here, and stayed exactly where he was.